We have both of our fantastic candidates. It's great to be chair of the 8th when you have two candidates like this who are all over the place, nonstop. They're both hitting doors, pounding the pavement. It's been a fantastic cycle to watch them both completely canvass the entire district. All the way to the far left is Chris Smith out of Lansing. Next to him, of course, is ELISA Slatkin from the Holly area. And I'm going to turn it over when you're ready.
Thank you. Oh, great. There are rules for today. I'm Vicki Barnett, and there are a few rules today that I just want to go through before we move on to the candidate intros that Dave and I both have. The first part, there will be 5-minute opening statement. Chris Smith will go first, and ELISA will follow with her 5 minutes. Our timekeeper is right there. So that takes up 10 minutes. We will then have 40 minutes of questions, and they're your questions. And then we will have closing statements, and ELISA will go first for 5 minutes with her closing statement, followed by Chris. Okay, everybody understand that? There will also be no hissing, booing, cheering, loud talk during the debate. I am going to silence my phone in a second, and I ask that all of you do the same. And we want to welcome you to the candidate forum for the 8th Congressional District for the Democratic primary. We have wonderful candidates, and I am really excited to have been invited to be here. I'm first going to do Chris's bio, and then we're going to hear ELISA's bio. Chris Smith is an MSU professor who has taught public policy and law for more than 30 years. He grew up in Michigan in a union household and attended Michigan public schools. He is the author of 40 books on law, public policy, and American government and criminal justice. He has been married for 34 years. His wife is Charlotte, and she has spent more than 2 decades as an administrator for programs for children, seniors, and veterans. They raised their 2 children in the 8th District. Their daughter, Alicia, I think it's Alicia, right? Their daughter, Alicia, is a beginning college professor. So exciting as a parent to know that. And their son, Eric, is a recent law school graduate and an infantry officer in the Michigan Army National Guard. And I'm so jealous, they recently became first-time grandparents.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you. It is great to see such a good turnout, and this is Democracy in Action. This is part of being civically engaged, which I'm going to do a shameless self-promotion here for the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. We're a new initiative on campus, but keep an eye out for all sorts of neat things from us in the next weeks, months, and years. But I digress. ELISA Slatkin is a 3rd-generation Michigander, raised in Oakland County, and she spent her early life on her family's farm in Holly, where she lives today. ELISA has dedicated her career to national service, serving 3 tours in Iraq alongside the U.S. military and working as a national security expert under both Democratic and Republican administrations. She has served at the White House, the State Department, and in top roles at the Pentagon, including as Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs under the Obama administration. She is married to Dave Moore, a former Apache pilot who retired as a colonel from the U.S. Army after 30 years of service.
And now we will turn it over to Chris for his 5-minute opening statement.
Are you sharing this mic, or you can each have one? Okay. Thank you, and let me reiterate she wants to see how tall I am. Okay, thank you. Let me reiterate my thanks to the UAW and Gerald and to Phil and people from the North Oakland Club who I know were very involved in this. The start of my journey as a candidate began on a certain night in November 2016 when my wife and I were standing in the hallway holding our heads and saying, what just happened? But we knew that it meant a crisis for the nation. And I spent decades teaching and writing about public policy and law. but I also knew at that moment I needed to find ways to do more. That teaching and writing was not enough. I started to do a blog on Donald Trump, figuring, let me point out the inconsistencies and dishonesty and implications of his policy positions. Within about 24 hours, I realized, wait a minute, the media is going to pay attention to him. That's not a contribution. So I turned my attention to Mike Bishop. And I knew I disagreed with Mike Bishop on policy issues, but I didn't realize how he truly embodies everything that is wrong with Congress until I actually studied him in detail and wrote about him throughout 2017. And as I began to study him, I also, had an instant realization, no Republican incumbent should go unchallenged. Everybody has to be challenged. Doesn't matter how gerrymandered the district, doesn't matter about mismatch in campaign funds, everybody needs to face a challenge. And I went around to Democratic office holders in Lansing, Gretchen Whitmer, State Rep Sam Singh, Senator Curtis Hertel, and I said, who's going to run against Mike Bishop? And they all said, don't know, haven't heard of anybody. It's a gerrymandered district. It's too slanted Republican. It's too expensive. It involves too much. And that partly set me to thinking that this needs to be done. I felt as if I was built for this based on my many years of studying and teaching law and public policy, and eventually move forward to say, yes, I'm going to do this. ELISA and I met in May 2017, along with Darlene Dominic, who was thinking of running, just to get acquainted. And at that lunch, when we got acquainted, we seemed to all agree a primary would be a good thing, because in 2016, we got in a situation of settling on one candidate too early, something happens in someone's life, then there's chaos trying to get a last-minute candidate. Of all the districts in the country, MIH should not put itself at risk of doing that again. And we figured a primary will help keep media attention, and a primary will make the person who wins the primary a better candidate because they've gone through a competitive election process first before they get to the big competition in November. So that was discussed a long, long time ago, along with the fact that ELISA wins the primary. I will support her and endorse her and encourage every Democrat to vote for her. So there's no issue about that. Now, as I set out as a first-time candidate, seeing what I did not like about politics, I decided if I don't like it, I'm not going to replicate it. So I'm going to say just what I think. I'm going to be perfectly forthright and clear on all of my policy positions, because I think that's one of the problems with Mike Bishop and the problems with Washington is people are not told the truth about where people stand. And I think voters need clarity. I think voters need comparisons between candidates, and I committed myself to that, even as people would sometimes say to me, oh, you can't say that, it's going to offend so-and-so. You can't say that, you might lose the votes over here. But we made that commitment, and we've gone through with it. Now, I'm a policy voter, and as a lot of you know, my focus is on policy positions. And so I invite you to look at my literature, because what I'm emphasizing, as most people here know, is that there are policy differences between us, and this gives you a choice. And there are a number of positions where I can say I am the only candidate who advocates X, Y, Z. So I look forward to handling your questions. Thank you to everyone for coming today. These are the events that make democracy vital and alive.
Yes, can folks hear me? Okay, great. So my name is ELISA Slatkin. Thank you for being here. I echo the comments of our moderators and of Chris. This kind of thing does not happen often enough in our system. We have gotten to the point where we're fighting via the media. We're not actually having person-to-person conversations. So thank you for being engaged citizens. I believe that we are at a once-in-a-generation moment in time where we have the opportunity to do something really big and send a really strong statement in our communities and in Washington. And I believe that Congress will not change itself. The stuff we see on TV, they are not capable of changing it themselves. If we want to change that body and have it do what it was intended to do by our founding fathers, which is provide a check and balance on the administration, we need to change who we send there. We need a different generation, a new generation of leaders who think different and work harder and do not forget that they are public servants. And I believe in our district, our current representative has forgotten that his first job and only job is to serve the public. Again, I'm a third generation Michigander. I live down the road on my family farm in Holly, but my entire background is in national security. I'm a former CIA officer, former Pentagon official with 3 tours in Iraq. I have, my husband I met him in Iraq. We had our Romeo and Juliet story in Saddam's palace. My 2 stepdaughters are in service. One is a brand new Army officer and the other one is a physician for the VA. And I have worked as a national security professional for both Democrats and Republicans. So I know from experience that what is happening right now is fundamentally different and is fundamentally unbecoming of the country that I served and the country that we all love. This is different. So that was the broad reason that I first started thinking about running. I have never been in politics. I've never been to a political event. I've never knocked a door, never asked anyone for money before this year. But the specific reason that I got into politics this time around was because of healthcare. Some of you know that my mom died in 2011 of ovarian cancer, and when she was diagnosed, she did not have health care. She had let it lapse. She struggled with health care her whole life. She had breast cancer as a 31-year-old young mom. So when she lost her job here in Oakland County in 2002, she lost her insurance. And because she had what we now call a pre-existing condition, she could not afford private insurance. She went for 5.5 years without, and we finally helped her get insurance in 2008. But in July of 2009, she let it lapse without telling us. She paid another bill. And in September of 2009, she went into an ER and was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So the month that our life is exploding and she needs emergency everything is the month that we are filling out the paperwork for her to declare bankruptcy. So the day and the moment and the hour that I decided to run for this seat was a year ago in May. There was a CNN, it was carried live on CNN, a Rose Garden ceremony, and the House of Representatives, the Republicans, voted to repeal the ACA, Obamacare, health care without a replacement. And I could see Mike Bishop in the 3rd or 4th row. And he was smiling and beaming and proud that he had voted to repeal health care without one town hall in this district, without any community meeting like this. He refused to meet with doctors and nurses from Sparrow, from Crittenden, from anywhere. He wouldn't meet with the Alzheimer's Association. And I turned to my husband and I said, no, you do not get to do this. You don't get to vote against your interests of your constituents without talking to them. That is the basic job requirement for being a representative. In the military context, this is dereliction of duty. It is a fireable offense. And so we decided that day that we were going to fire him. We have been working ever since. Thank you for being engaged citizens. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for believing in that civil political dialogue is still possible. We are going to show Washington how to act because they are not setting an example. Thank you for taking the time to be here, and I look forward to a healthy debate.
Thanks to you both. We'll get right into it with the first question. Again, these are straight from you. In some instances, we've gotten a lot of questions about the same topic. We'll combine or paraphrase, but these are straight from the audience. First question. We'll let both candidates address it. ELISA first, and then Chris, and then the next question, Chris, and then ELISA. Okay. First question, what do each of you perceive the greatest need, what do each of you perceive to be the greatest needs of this district, and what are the opportunities for addressing them in collaboration with the rest of the Michigan delegation?
Sure. So I think the greatest needs are twofold. One is substance and one is style. On substance, wherever I go, whoever I'm talking to, the issue of the cost of healthcare and prescription drugs comes up wherever I go. Whatever plan people are on, whatever health situation they're dealing with, it comes up routinely. So I believe that is our generation's problem to solve. The way Social Security was our issue to solve in the 30s, it is now our generation's issue to solve. And I would do two things. Number one, I believe in a buy-in to Medicare for anyone at any age. If you're 19 years old, you should have the ability to get a decent plan at a decent price. And if it does what it's supposed to do, it will become the most popular program in the country. That means you won't have to stay at a job you don't like because your health care is good. That means employers won't be constraining the size of their businesses based on how many employees they have. And that means that all people will have access to health care that they can afford, which I believe. And then the second thing is let Medicare buy prescription drugs in bulk. Right now, I'm on military insurance. Military insurance, they buy drugs in bulk. And on Medicare, they cannot. So I pay roughly 2/3 of what my dad pays for the same exact medicine at the same exact pharmacy. I believe that is just plain greed. And in style, I will just say, my goal would be, if elected, a year or so later, everyone in this room would turn to each other and say, you know what, ELISA has really changed how I think about engaging with my congressperson. We have gotten people have gotten away with just phoning it in this district. I believe in reversing the paradigm and going out to the citizens of the district and asking them what they think. Virtual town halls, engaging on social media, and lots of other ways. So style and substance, I think, on two issues.
Okay, thanks. Chris.
I agree that I put healthcare as the greatest need for this district and for the nation because it affects so many aspects of people's lives. It goes to family, economic security. We have tens of millions of people suffering under the threat of bankruptcy, of physical suffering, of premature death. And it affects other things too. The ability of people to focus on jobs, education, child rearing. If we can take that off their backs, it'll be a great help. I'm an advocate of Medicare for all, not the static version of Medicare we have today. You know, this is more of a slogan talking about single-payer universal health care, but a better version that would cover prescriptions, that would cover basic dental care, and would cover everybody, including people who can't afford to buy into a system, so that everyone would be covered, as so many other countries in the world already do. Right now, there is a Medicare for All caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. It was co-founded and is now co-chaired by Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. So there are already actors from Michigan in place in Congress pushing for this vision of trying to make sure that everyone in the country has guaranteed access to health care. We see countries around the world that have accomplished this. Right now, Americans pay twice as much per person as comparable countries around the world. We get less coverage, we get worse results with respect to life expectancy and issues of child health, etc. So I think because health care affects so many aspects of people's lives, if we can take that off everyone's back, it will be a huge advance for the district and for the country.
Thank you both. I'm going to scrap the question I was going to ask before and now move to a follow-up on this. Do you prefer an incremental approach to fixing healthcare or a start from scratch with a single-payer approach? Please explain. We'll start with Chris.
Well, one of the realities of thinking about running for Congress U.S. House of Representatives, is what you're running to be is 1 out of 435 votes. So when we run for Congress, it's not like running for governor saying, this is the program that will be. You're saying, here's what I'm going to fight for. Here is the goal that I think is so important for the nation that we are failing if we don't try to reach it. So as 1 out of 435, the reality is you're coming into a context, we don't know what the composition of the next Congress will be, and that will affect the ability to take a big step or to take small steps along the way. My prediction is, though, that there are inevitably going to be enough people in Congress who are hesitant about a big step that it will make incremental steps inevitable. The exact nature of those incremental steps, there's a lot of work out there about what those might be. And certainly I would defer to Debbie Dingell about the work that's already done and plug in as an advocate for her. But the big thing to me is we have to make Medicare for all the goal, that we ultimately make that big step. Because if we don't state it as a goal, I think we're going to fall short. Moreover, if you ask the question, how are we a better country when we leave millions of people out of health care? I don't see an answer for that, and that drives me to the ultimate big goal.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, I know it's become a dirty word in politics, but I do believe our system was set up so that different parties come to the table and figure out a way forward, right? That requires some amount of compromise. And I will tell you that as I've talked to people in the district about healthcare, there is as many different views on what we should do as there are people in this district, right? That's how you know it's our generation's challenge to deal with, because it's on everyone's mind and everyone is searching for some way to deal with this. I believe that a buy into Medicare uses good old-fashioned competition to show what is possible. So for those people who really fear the government providing their health care, it allows them to stay with the health care they have if that's what they prefer, and then learn from others who go ahead and take that buy-in. I believe word of mouth is very important when it comes to health care. Right? We talk about with our friends and our family, like, I've got great coverage, I love what I have, or, you know, my coverage doesn't cover the very thing that I need. If we have a buy-in to Medicare, I think people who are very concerned about giving up their personal program would have the opportunity to have it proven to them that it's possible for this system to work. But I don't believe in forcing anyone to choose a system that they don't want. I don't believe in that. And so I would go to Congress with a fire under me to get this issue on the agenda. I think Obamacare, the ACA, helped us in some important ways by covering people with pre-existing conditions. I think that's critical. And now we need to push forward, but give people the opportunity to see what's possible to work. That's what I would propose.
I'll just say the candidates are doing an excellent job feeding into questions that we have, so as another follow-up based on some comments. Given the current gridlock in Congress, do you think it is more important to stick to your principles or to work for compromise? How would you work with the Republicans?
Sure. So my experience as a civil servant is working for both administrations. I've worked for Democrats, I've worked for Republicans. And then as someone who was an assistant secretary at the Pentagon and who worked for years principally on negotiating between disparate parties, I believe that we are at our best when we bring people together, we build consensus based on what we still do have in common, and we come up with practical solutions. I am a points on the board kind of person. That doesn't mean you give up your principles. That means you come to the table and you say, here's what I'm advocating for, here's what I want, let's try and find some common ground. Now, we are living in deeply polarized times. Both parties are trying to figure out their strategic vision for the way forward, and it's pretty muddled right now. But I do believe in our system as set up, and I do believe, particularly if we flip Congress, then many Republican members of Congress will realize it is time to get to work, that it is not a winning strategy to just salute whatever this administration says, and it's time to actually sit in a room, kick out the media, and get something done. So I don't think it's a choice of principles or compromise. You walk into the room like I've done with negotiating with anybody, the Russians, the Iraqis, you start with where you have common ground, you know where your red lines are, but the goal is to get something done.
So I don't think there is a choice between principles and compromise so much as there are different kinds of issues that steer you one way or another on those things. If you're talking about issues of discrimination, there is no compromise there. We remember General Kelly at the White House, right, saying, well, you know, the reason it was a civil war is that it couldn't compromise on slavery. You don't compromise on slavery. You don't compromise on pay discrimination against women, right? So there are matters where it's principle. If it's problem solving about roads or the environment or what have you, there's a much greater opportunity to think, what evidence can we bring to bear on this issue? One of the problems that we face, of course, is that we have Republicans in Congress who are currently so spineless that they will not speak out against the president no matter what. Well, okay, if you announce you're not running again, then suddenly you'll say something and everyone thinks that's courage, but it's not. And we have a situation in Congress where the Republicans literally lock the Democrats out of the room to write laws about big issues. The public would like there to be bipartisan cooperation. The public wants to hear that there's going to be bipartisan cooperation. But right now, we need some different Republicans in order for that to happen on big issues. There's some issues where they already work together, things about veterans and kids, right? But big issues like health care, we've got to change the composition of Congress because the Republicans who are there now are unwilling to work with Democrats, no matter how much you say, gee, we should work in a bipartisan fashion, that's what the people want. That's really a big impediment, and so I agree, changing the composition of Congress is important to become problem solvers.
The next question is an amalgamation of a lot of questions that all of you have sent in, and they deal with the integrity of our election system. So I'm going to ask you both, and we'll start with Chris. How do you propose to prevent foreign interference in our elections, and how would you support changing systems at the ballot box, either going to paper ballots or using the current system that we have, and making sure that we also have open elections that are fair and encourage everybody to vote?
Thanks for that question, because I think it's huge, and I think Alyssa's phrase, dereliction of duty, looms large here when we look at the President of the United States today. I mean, we have to invest resources and hire people because this foreign interference with our election system is a real threat to the integrity of our democracy. And there's no magic wand solution. But there is a need to devote a lot of attention to it, and that begins with getting rid of people who are in denial about it. So that is essential. But our democracy falls short of what it ought to be for a lot of reasons in our electoral system. Gerrymandering is one of them, and we still have our fingers crossed we'll get to vote on that in Michigan. But it also calls attention to the fact that many of these things are controlled at the state level and not the federal level. But I would like to make every effort possible to create a system that maximizes participation in fair electoral districts. And that means things like automatic voter registration. That means no reason absentee ballot. That means multi-day voting, because Tuesday is frankly not a convenient day for a lot of working people. And we need to be, and you know, the restrictive voter ID laws should be pushed aside as well. We need to do everything possible to maximize and encourage participation. The Because right now we see one political party, the Republicans, doing everything possible to not only limit voter participation through unfair districts and voting restrictions, but to tolerate foreign interference in our elections. And this really is a grave threat to everything that all of our ancestors fought for in setting up this country and moving to where we are today.
The past week has been quite a crystallizing period of time to realize kind of what the consequences are of meddling in our elections and what it means when you have an administration who doesn't believe in their own intelligence community and their own Justice Department. This one hits particularly close to home, given I'm a former CIA officer. Never in my lifetime did I think I would see the head of state standing next to a former KGB officer on the public stage, endorsing him and his intelligence community over the president's own intelligence community and Department of Justice. So a couple of things. When it comes to protecting our democracy, that has to be our principal goal, and that shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be a patriotic issue. Everyone should be invested in that. And then we need to do a couple of things, both defense and offense, to make sure that we protect ourselves. On defense, we need to ensure that Robert Mueller is allowed to complete his work. He is a well-respected statesman, one of the few we have left that's respected on both sides. He needs to be able to complete his work, and every member of Congress should be standing up right now to endorse and protect that role in our democracy. Number two, if we were in normal times and all 17 of our intelligence community agencies had just announced, as they did a year ago, that there was Russian meddling in our election, any president in previous times would have set up a blue ribbon task force with the greatest minds of a generation to understand how to protect our democracy in 2018 and 2020. That has not happened for lots of reasons that I think we all know, and I believe that if this Congress is flipped, we should immediately go to and endorse such a panel, have our social media leaders help us understand how to protect our democracy.
Changing gears quite a bit, I guess. An issue that has been in the news for a while, always seems to pop up under unfortunate circumstances, and that's the Second Amendment. Here's we have a number of questions about it, so I'll ask a multi-pronged question. We'll start with a more general, or ask you to generally describe your interpretation of the Second Amendment, and comment on more specific proposals that we've heard about in recent weeks and months, whether it's arming teachers, universal background checks, red flag laws, or common sense gun legislation.
So this issue comes up wherever you go in the district. Very polarizing issue. What I would say is I grew up in a gun-owning family, just down here at the farm. We all always shot guns. When I was training for my 3 tours in Iraq, I carried a Glock and an M4, and my husband, as an Army officer, carried a weapon every day he was deployed. So I'm a believer in the Second Amendment. But it's because of that background that I believe we need to have a real conversation about gun safety legislation. And indeed, our congressmen and women have been derelict in not having this conversation. I personally believed after Sandy Hook that there was no way we could go on without some sort of change. And we've seen that since then, and many, many others, mass shootings, we've seen no change. So I believe that we need to do a couple of things and start where we have common ground. And I believe that that starting place is universal background checks and closing all the loopholes. Just like for me, CIA would have never put me in weapons training without a background check. Same thing with the military. Everyone who buys a weapon should go through a background check. And we know in Michigan, a significant proportion of the guns bought and sold here are through the internet, through gun shows, and through private sales, which do not have to go through a background check. That needs to change. Number 2, as an Army wife, I do not believe that we need to sell material that makes any weapon a fully automatic weapon, bump stocks, extended magazines. And certainly as someone who's got training in weapons, I do not believe ever in arming teachers or arming anyone who does not want to be holding and dealing with a weapon, especially around children. I'll reiterate what I've said many times, that the only person who should ever be in a school carrying a weapon is a certified, trained, on-contract security officer who's there because the school has brought them there. Thanks.
With respect to the Second Amendment, I've taught about the Second Amendment for more than 30 years. I've written about the Second Amendment. And so my initial view related to the question is my opinion about the Second Amendment is irrelevant. And one of the things that has interfered with our discussion of policy is too often having people like Ted Nugent give opinions about the Second Amendment that influence what other people think. What's relevant is what the courts have said the definition of the Second Amendment is as a matter of law. And the definition of the Second Amendment as it stands right now, it may change, is that law-abiding adults have a right to keep a handgun in the home for self-protection. Boom, that's it. That doesn't mean you can't have other kinds of guns. That just means all of the other area is available for us to talk about and to legislate as a matter of policy. We can't solve gun violence, but what we have to think about is how are we going to reduce risk. And if you look at my website, I have a whole series of things that I strongly advocate. End the sales of military-style weapons to the public. Let's have licensing, registration, record keeping, in addition to improving background checks, in addition to lengthening waiting periods. There's a lot of different things we can do to reduce risk. But it's not going to solve problems because there's so many guns available and there's so many people who hunt and do other things that the goal is really how do we reduce risk through regulation. And the Second Amendment, its legal definition, does not stop us from doing that at all. It's a matter of will. It's a matter of having some legislators who have the spine to stand up to the NRA and to say, I don't care how much money you spend to get rid of me. While I'm here, I will vote for the safety of the public. Spend away. The public is more important than me keeping my job in a legislature.
The next subject that's been currently in the news a lot is immigration. We have a question on sanctuary cities, so I'm going to kind of roll that into a general question on how would you reform our immigration system, and would you support protecting cities that choose to be sanctuary cities like the city of Lansing? And we'll start with Chris.
Well, let me start with the sanctuary cities question first. I am hesitant to give any sort of blanket declaration about it because it isn't clear to me that every city that declares itself and uses that term means exactly the same thing by that. I do support the idea of cities making declarations in opposition to things that they see in the federal government that they regard as unlawful or immoral or inhumane. And I do think cities ought to have some autonomy to not be coerced by the federal government to engage in activities that are arguably either unlawful or contrary to our values. With respect to the border, we need humane policies, not separating families, a greater recognition of the contributions of immigration to our country. We need to actually study how businesses and why businesses are employing people who did not enter the country legally. So we have a sense of what the problem is, and to stop this ethnic-based scapegoating where the president leads us into being distracted from other issues in the country by picking out someone against which some segment of our population will direct their hate. We need to have border patrol. We need to have an effort to control who comes in and out of the country. But realistically, if you look at the demographics of birth rates in this country, et cetera, we need immigration to keep growing as an economy. And it is not a matter of scapegoating, it's a matter of studying the problem and making sure we address it according to our law, respecting our asylum laws, and according to our humane values, and the recognition that the real symbol of this country is the Statue of Liberty, not some hypothetical wall.
I think that what we have going on right now on immigration, whether it's separation of families, whether it's our DACA kids protesting, whether it's our farmers who left food in the field last summer because they couldn't get their temporary visas, our union workers who are being underbid by companies that use undocumented labor illegally. The system is broken. Our immigration system is broken. And when you have a broken system and you decide to selectively enforce it, it's not surprising that it's extremely agitating as a national issue. And I think that's what we have going on right now. I believe immigration is an economic issue, a national security issue, and a moral issue. We need comprehensive immigration reform. That's a sentence that people throw out, but it is true because the entirety of the system is broken. And there is draft legislation right now in the House that is stuck because the majority will not bring it to the floor. I believe it would pass if the majority would bring it to the floor. That comprehensive immigration reform needs to be key to our economy. We need immigration. Our employers will tell you that. Our farmers will tell you that. Our fudge shops at Mackinac Island will tell you that, right? We need immigration. We need to protect ourselves, right? So I believe in comprehensive immigration reform. If we need enhanced border security through technological means, then we should provide it. We also need a pathway to citizenship for our DACA kids and for others. And then we need to enforce this system. So if companies are going to be using undocumented labor, they will be punished for that. And I believe until we do that, we're going to be having these sporadic conversations and agitations as a nation because we cannot selectively enforce a broken system.
Campaign finance question. Or a couple. Can you tell us about how you have approached raising money in this race, where your contributions have come from, individual versus PAC? The question in front of me says, were there any large hedge funds or investment company donations? And then maybe a more general response to the issue of corruption or perceived corruption in government. And what would you do to promote reform or other anti-corruption initiatives?
So I think one of the reasons I was reticent to get in this race when I started thinking about it was money in politics. I knew that money in politics was bad. I did not understand the order of magnitude until I actually started thinking about running. So to watch, and see that Mr. Bishop and his allies in 2016 spent $3 million to win this seat, that was daunting to me. And to understand the rules of our campaign finance system, it was daunting. And what I would say is the role of money in politics is more insidious than I thought. And so I did a couple of things. We made the decision and announced it publicly in January that I would not be taking corporate PAC dollars during the life of this campaign. And as someone who was in the defense and intelligence world, that's something that was open to me, that was offered to me. 90% of our donations are from individuals, and 75% of our donations are under $100. I am extremely proud that we made that decision and that we have been outraising Mike Bishop every single quarter that we've been in the race, because the vast majority of his money comes from corporate PACs, particularly from the pharmaceutical industry. I've also been endorsed by a group called End Citizens United, and that group, when you sign up and to be endorsed by them, that means you commit to working on campaign finance legislation within your first year of being an elected official. Because between our campaign finance rules and gerrymandering, to me, those are the two core underlying things that if we could change them, we could get back to a healthier system of government.
This is a big problem for us, and it looms even larger than some other problems because a Supreme Court decision has imposed on us a large aspect of this problem, which would require changing the Supreme Court's composition and revisiting it, or a constitutional amendment. And I do support a constitutional amendment to get rid of Citizens United. But early on, some things happened related to the National Democratic Party's decisions. that led us to think hard, what is the real idealistic way that we're going to approach this? Because if we don't like something going on in politics, do we want to jump completely into it? So, I have not asked any PAC of any kind for any money. I have not attended any fundraising event sponsored by any PAC. Every dollar I have came from individuals. Now what that means is you're going to be behind in the money race. And so it's a grand experiment here in a way. Can you try to move forward in a way that says, can we campaign and show that votes can beat money? Right? And we're seeing some signs around the country that there may be some contexts and moments and opportunities where that happens. But if we're going to change politics, we have to have some candidates who are willing to live it differently and to do it differently and not follow the playbook that the professional campaign management industry says that you must follow. So that's what we're trying to do right now, and we'll see how it turns out. But ideally, right, if we get an informed, engaged electorate, might they reward people who are office holders for their performance and not just look at and make office holders feel pressured to be constantly involved in a great money chase that gives power to special interests?
You guys are doing a good job of listening to the timekeeper. I really appreciate that. This next question deals with the fact that we are home to 20% of the world's fresh water and stewards of the Great Lakes. Money's been cut in the federal budget this year for supporting Great Lakes cleanup. Do you believe that the Congress should have a greater role in protecting the Great Lakes and supporting tighter federal restrictions on ballast water discharge to prevent invasive species in our Great Lakes and in the other delta areas across the country? And does that mean you also, and what is your view on pipelines and drilling under the Great Lakes? I know it's a long, convoluted question.
I think Congress needs to jump in and do a lot more. And again, I try to be very forthright about my positions. I think there should be no pipelines whatsoever under the Great Lakes. I think we should not have any drilling. And certainly, Congress, with its authority under Article 1 to regulate interstate commerce, ought to be able to go after these issues of ballast discharge as well. Right now, we have the Environmental Protection Agency at the national level that's been hijacked to be a servant of profit-seeking businesses. We got to get that back, and we really have to pay attention to water. We got to invest in science so that we're studying and knowing about these issues better. We have to recognize climate change is real and droughts are affecting other parts of the country. It will increase and our water will be even more important. So water is an issue about guarding the Great Lakes. It's an issue about upgrading and protecting our infrastructure. Look at Flint. It's an issue about the cost of water. Because if there are people in communities who cannot afford water and they have their water shut off, that creates issues of public health problems and homelessness, etc. This has got to be, along with other things related to climate change, a very important goal for Congress. And right now, we're not merely in denial about climate change, but our government has actually been hijacked by profit-seeking companies, the rejection of science, short-term thinking about how the Koch brothers can squeeze out a few more dollars from us before they pass away, when in fact we need to be thinking about correcting the problems we have now and safeguarding for future generations. The fact that as Michiganders, we are the guardians of fresh water, and that is really a kind of sacred responsibility for us.
Jump the gun.
Sorry. So I don't think anyone is missing the irony that in the greatest concentration of fresh water in the world, we cannot reliably provide clean drinking water to our citizens. I don't think anyone's missing that. And I think that protecting and stewarding our Great Lakes, our waters, our streams, our watersheds is something that's actually very bipartisan, right? I think a lot of people really know that our state and our identity as a state is connected to clean waters here. But as I've traveled around the district, I hear a lot about our waters, but of course our water. And I think number one, we need a federal safe, clean drinking water standard. Right now, there's actually no federal requirement that your community publicly put out in a publicly available way how frequently they test your water, what they test it for, and what the results are. And in our state, I don't think that we can go on that way. I'm actually so concerned about the age of our water infrastructure that I believe we're going to have the conversation in Michigan over the next year, 3, 2, about whether clean water out of your tap is a right or a privilege. And I believe it is a right. I will tell you, I do not believe in drilling in the Great Lakes, in contrast again to the person that both of us are seeking to run against, and on climate change. To me, I see climate change as something that's just, it is a fact, it exists. At the Pentagon, my team helped sponsor the first study of how climate change will affect the military. It's just a matter of prudent planning, and I believe Michigan has to have a 10-year plan to mitigate the effects of climate change. Last thing, I think that the Great Lakes states can do a lot to show people that there are still bipartisan issues where we can work together. So if I'm elected, I would be definitely looking to lead and help reinvigorate the Great Lakes Caucus. Any state that touches a Great Lake should be working together to preserve the health of the industry, or of the lakes.
The Great Lakes, certainly something that hits close to home. Other issues in Michigan also hit close to home. Last question.
Oh, go ahead.
We'll end it with a Michigan question. Can you please talk to us about what you would do from a federal government perspective to deal with issues that are central to Michigan? Infrastructure, changes, and education.
Yes, so on infrastructure. So unfortunately, the one thing that unites us all as Michiganders, besides I think a love of our Great Lakes, is our complaints about our infrastructure. It's truly a bipartisan, that and maybe dogs fits in there too. We are all still very passionate across the aisle about our dogs. The roads and infrastructure is the most visible part of the problem, but our water infrastructure has me much more worried, to be honest. So I believe the federal government must be the leader on a once-in-a-generation infrastructure investment in our state. Donald Trump came in talking about this. He talked a big game about infrastructure. When we actually saw the bill, it left it up to states and private industry to provide for our infrastructure. That does not work. We need a once-in-a-generation investment, and then local townships, local counties need to plan for maintenance of our infrastructure when they lay out the costs. We have not invested in the maintenance of our structures. On education, I think our education, public education in this state, all you need to know is that, I'm 42 years old. When I was a kid, we were in the top 10 public school states in the country, and now we're in the bottom 10. You need to start there. And it makes our gubernatorial election such a critical election this cycle because of the way we think about the philosophy of educating our kids and how we fund it. Those things need to be completely reassessed. From a federal government perspective, you can enforce standards for anyone, any school, private charter school or not, that are taking federal dollars. If you're taking taxpayer dollars, you should have certain standards for educating all of our kids, whether they're ESL, they have a disability, they live far away. If you're taking taxpayer dollars, you should live up to the same transparency set of standards that our public schools have to live up to.
The federal government is very well positioned to collect and distribute money in targeted ways. And that's one of the ways that the federal government can have a role with respect to infrastructure, because these are national issues. I mean, water infrastructure is part of it, but you know, I became a licensed driver in Michigan in 1974, and the roads have never been worse than they are today. And this affects our economy, among other things, especially Michigan with the border crossing with Canada. So that, I think, is a big part of the federal role in addressing Michigan's problems, is in producing funding that are directed to these problems, not just given to the states so some governor can spend it how she or he wants to do it, but also with respect to education, healthcare, and other issues. Funding and setting standards. These are things the federal government can do. With respect to education, I think the federal government can look at what's going on around the country, different states that are experimenting with different things. We've often talked about federalism as a way in which states can be policy laboratories, and those that develop successful policies and practices, they can be copied and disseminated elsewhere. And the federal government is great, position-wise, not acting on it now, to draw from this and disseminate these ideas. So I, for example, advocate free community college as a mechanism that some states are already doing. Let's find a way to make it national. It will help reduce student loan burdens that people have. It will help to motivate kids in school to know that they can go somewhere. Similarly, the federal government ought to take a more active role in equalizing the resources and opportunity in school systems around the country, because that is the most shocking deficiency in education, as we know in Michigan, are the gross disparities between school systems that produce gross disparities in outcomes of what kids get.
Unfortunately, we have so many great questions left regarding tariffs and choice and healthcare for women, and I encourage you to ask those questions afterward, just to give you a taste of what we still have up here. But we will now move to closing statements. You each get 5 minutes to close, and we will start with ELISA and end with Chris.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I think in closing, I just wanted to talk, we've talked a bit about substance, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about style, and then talk about kind of where I think we are as a country right now, in the moment we're living in. On style, I mentioned it at the beginning, but I want, you know, a year from now for us to be thinking that it is possible to have a different relationship with our congressperson, to reverse the paradigm. And some of the ways that I would do that is reopen offices in the most populous part of the district. I would have community liaison officers who are responsible for keeping me up to date on the issues that are most pressing to some of the underrepresented groups in our district. And then I would have community advisory boards on things like healthcare, so that people across the district have the opportunity on a quick turn basis to know what I'm voting on, give advice, provide feedback from people who are actually experts in the field, and then people who are just living it from day to day. The other thing I just wanted to sort of say and muse about, if I could for 1 second, is kind of what moment are we at right now in our country. I think one of the most disturbing things about what's going on right now is not any one policy, but it is the vitriol and the anger and the polarization that is being spewed from Washington, and the way that that affects us on the ground here. Michigan has always been a place where we have voted for the person over the party. You know, when I was growing up, my dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat. We in Michigan never fought bitterly about politics. We fought bitterly about sports. But Washington has polarized us. Washington has come in and made our Thanksgiving dinners uncomfortable, have made it so that moms don't want to talk about any issues when they drop off their kids at school. And I believe this is one of the most unhealthy things about what's going on, and I believe it's fundamentally different from a standard Republican administration, right? So I'm focused on this idea that service to our communities, service to each other, is right now, in this era, service to our country. It is the most patriotic thing that we can do to help our communities heal. And our elected officials are not going to do it for us. So when you volunteer in your community, when you engage and come to an event like this and try to figure out who to vote for, when you volunteer for a campaign, that is actually an act of national service, I believe, right now. We need it. It is absolutely vital to demonstrating to our kids that the values that we brought them up with are the values that our country still upholds. That you treat other people the way you want them to be treated. That you reach out to people who you don't understand because you want to understand them. And I'm telling you, if we do not do it, no one else is coming to save us. So just by being here, you're being engaged. Just by being here, to me, it is an act of patriotism. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
This is an important election. I mean, and that's an understatement, because every week we see things happening in Washington that remind us, oh my gosh, the stakes are even higher than we knew the week before. And in a very ironic way, in running for Congress as a first-time candidate, I have Mike Bishop as my role model. Oh wait, I meant anti-role model or something like that. Because as I said, he embodies everything that I think is wrong. And I'm really aspiring to do things the way I think they ought to be done, not the way that campaign professionals and others say, this is what you have to do. And so I am going to continue being committed to being very forthright about where I stand on policy, because Mike Bishop never is. I had the disheartening experience of trying to go to one of Mike Bishop's fake town hall meetings and being blocked from even getting into the parking lot through a variety of changing and disingenuous excuses. So I think it's very important to have candidates and members of Congress hold town halls and to actually talk to people and to be willing to take any question from any audience, even if you know that people don't agree with what you say. Because that's how we have dialogue, that's how we have discoveries of common ground, and that's how people also can feel that they are participating in a democracy. And I think all those things are important. And then of course you have the issue of money. So far in this cycle, Mike Bishop has raised $1.4 million from political action committees. And we see in his votes and his evasiveness how he basically does whatever they say. You know, he's on a leash, they tell him what to do, he runs and does it, and he tells us something different. And it's infuriating. I am trying to go and contribute to my country in a moment of crisis. I don't want to be compromised by those kinds of pressures that I see going on out there. I want to be able to look in the mirror at the end of each day and say, however I voted in Congress today, it was because I thought it was the best thing for the people of the 8th District, without any concern about how it would affect my fundraising, or how it would affect my prospects for re-election, or how it would trigger the NRA to come after me. Because if we're going to do politics differently, we got to have some people who start to live it differently. And that means not going to Congress with plans for how you're going to turn that into your career, but going to Congress saying, every day, I do the best thing for this district, and what happens to me personally down the road as a result is irrelevant, because what's important is the fate of the nation and the fate of the district, and as we stand today, the fate of the earth, when we look at global warming, when we look at the rejection of science. Now, people who have heard me say when I've spoken at places that after President Trump was elected, one of the thoughts I had in my head, and one of the things that I said to people was, what am I going to say when my hypothetical grandchild someday says to me, what did you do in the time of Trump? And then, as many of you know, 6 months later, my daughter and her husband said, hey, guess what? And then not so many months after that, our grandson arrived. And I cared about future generations already, but of course this makes it much more personal, And since my grandson's mother is a sociologist, I know he's going to ask me, what did you do in the time of Trump? And I have to be able to say not just that I tried to do everything I could. I went on unpaid leave of absence from my job. I threw myself into this 100% for my country, for the Americans today, and for future generations. But in getting to Congress, I need to be able to say that same thing every day. It isn't about special interests. It isn't about fundraising. It isn't about re-election. It is solely about one thing. What are the policy decisions that are needed by this district, this state, and this nation? And I'm completely committed to that. So thank you for coming today, and thank you for your great questions that permitted us to illuminate who we are and where we stand.
Thank you all very much for attending. You have a big choice to make in August, and I know you will all go to the polls and make that choice and make sure that we are progressive Democrats all the way and united at the end of the day. You are more than welcome to stay a little while longer and chat among yourselves, but at 3 o'clock you can no longer stay here. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thank you all for showing up today. And thank you to my partner Dave, you were great.